Please, Glenda, you'd never survive without me. The words hung in the air like a knife. They weren't shouted. They weren't even said in anger. Richard had delivered them with that same smooth confidence he used in his PR pitches, as though stating a self-evident truth. He didn't notice how my body went rigid, how my breath stilled. I smiled faintly, not because I agreed, but because that smile had become my armor. A smile could cover the bruises left by years of subtle control, years of being told that my life was better because he had curated it for me. My name is Glenda Carter. I'm 35 years old. I'm a civil engineer, the kind of person who designs and manages structures meant to last decades, even centuries. Bridges, tunnels, towers, things that demand precision, foresight, and strength. At work, people trust me with multi-million-dollar projects, yet somehow in my own home with my own boyfriend, I'd been made to feel like a helpless child. Richard and I had been together for 5 years. For the first few months, I thought I had found someone magnetic, someone who understood the world in ways I never could. Richard thrived in high-end public relations. His entire job revolved around image, how things appeared, how they were perceived. And when he moved into my apartment 3 years ago, he brought that professional skill set into my personal life. It began innocently enough. He'd suggest a new outfit for me, tilting his head with that practiced smile, insisting that my engineer's wardrobe was far too utilitarian. Soon, my closet transformed into what he called a lifestyle brand. When he reorganized my kitchen, it was under the guise of efficiency. He insisted my layout was logically unsound. Our social calendar shifted too. Little by little, my old friends disappeared, replaced with his vibrant, photogenic circle, who clinked champagne glasses and spoke in networking slogans. Richard never framed it as control. It was always improvement. He wasn't smothering me. He was elevating me. He wasn't isolating me. He was introducing me to a better world. And I let it happen. Because truthfully, I hate confrontation in my personal life. I'd rather spend 12 hours revising a bridge load analysis than argue about where to eat dinner. Richard knew that. He thrived on that. It was easier to give in than to brace for the sighs, the raised eyebrows, the endless lectures about how I was limiting myself. Like the proverbial frog in slowly boiling water, I had convinced myself the rising heat was comfort. The only corner of my world untouched by his influence was my little workshop. A spare bedroom turned sanctuary stacked with miniature beams, foam bases, and precise replicas of structures I admired. I had built the Golden Gate Bridge once, with every suspension cable delicately aligned. Later, the Sydney Opera House, its sails crafted from thin resin panels. It was tedious work, meticulous, requiring the kind of patience most people don't possess. For me, it was peace. Richard called it my tinkering. He called the models dusty toys. Every time he dismissed them, I told myself it didn't matter. But deep down it did. Those models weren't toys. They were proof that my hands, my mind, my quiet persistence could build something breathtaking. 2 months ago, everything came to a head. My boss, Mr. Davies, called me into his office with a gleam in his eye. Glenda, he said, we want you as lead engineer for the new flagship bridge project at our European headquarters. It's a 2-year posting, full relocation, everything covered. This is the kind of project people build their entire careers around. I remember walking home that night, floating my heart, hammering with excitement. This was it, the dream I had chased since university. A career-defining moment. I could hardly wait to tell Richard. But when I did, his reaction was a frown. Europe, he muttered, not even looking up from his tablet. 2 years. That's a logistical nightmare. I'll have to rebuild all my contacts. The shipping for my things will be a mess. We'll need to put this ugly furniture in storage. He spoke as if my triumph was a minor inconvenience for his social calendar. I laughed nervously. I was thinking, maybe I'd go alone at first, just for a few months. Settle in, find my footing. That was when he looked up. The disbelief in his face was chilling his smirk, cutting deeper than any shout could have. Go alone. Please, Glenda. You'd never survive without me. You'd be eating takeout every night. Your clothes wrinkled, your life in shambles within a week. And in that moment, something inside me cracked. All my years of swallowing resentment, of telling myself it was easier not to argue, congealed into something sharp, cold, unmovable. He didn't see me as a partner. He saw me as a dependent, a project he managed. But I am not a project. I am an engineer. I build things meant to stand the test of time. And now, I was about to build something new, a life without him. I forced myself to nod that night to let him believe he had won, that he was indispensable. Of course you're right, I said softly. But the next morning I walked into Mr. Davies's office and accepted the promotion, quietly, without fanfare, without hesitation. And just like that, I began the most intricate project of my life. Not a bridge, not a tower, something far more delicate, far more dangerous. The silent dismantling of my existence with Richard. By the time Richard poured his morning espresso and started scrolling through his emails, I had already made the decision that would alter both of our lives forever. He thought I was heading to the office as usual, but really I was stepping into the first act of my escape. At work, I told Mr. Davies I had accepted the promotion. I made one request: discretion. I explained carefully that I was in the process of separating from my long-term partner and I didn't want complications. He nodded with the kind of understanding only a man who had seen many messy divorces could give. "We'll handle it quietly," he said. "Your relocation team is top tier. Tell them exactly what you need." And so the parallel worlds began. By day, Richard and I looked like a couple preparing for an exciting international adventure. He told friends over cocktails that we'd soon be living in Paris or Amsterdam, somewhere stylish, somewhere glamorous. He bragged about the new opportunities we would have. Our Instagram feed, curated entirely by him, of course, was sprinkled with hints of big changes ahead. But beneath the surface, I was orchestrating the cleanest break of my life. Step 1, secure the new life. I contacted the corporate relocation team and told them everything, well, almost everything. They arranged a premium furnished apartment for my first 3 months in Europe, the kind of place meant to house executives in transition. A sleek apartment with utilities covered security tight and not a trace of Richard's influence. They provided me with a stipend, rerouted all communication through my private work email, and even offered to handle the more delicate logistics. Step 2, dismantle the old life. I visited my landlord, signed the 60-day termination notice, and gave a firm end date, August 15th. The day after a new tenant would move in thanks to a rental agency I had already lined up. On August 14th, my flight would depart. By the time Richard came back to what he thought was his home, it would belong to someone else. Step 3, possessions. This was the most dangerous part. Every item in that apartment was a clue, a possible tripwire. I needed to preserve my own belongings, and at the same time ensure Richard's were handled with care. I couldn't give him ammunition to accuse me of cruelty. I hired movers through the relocation service, explaining that only items explicitly tagged by me were to be shipped overseas. Everything else, clothes decor, even his carefully curated cocktail sets, were to be packed and delivered to a high-end storage facility under his name. I paid the first 3 months in advance. When I told Richard relocation specialists would be visiting to evaluate the move, he barely looked up from his phone. "Good," he said. "Make sure they don't scratch the marble table. It's practically the centerpiece of my aesthetic." His arrogance was my camouflage. While Richard scrolled through real estate listings in Paris, dreaming of apartments with wrought iron balconies, I was securing my freedom piece by piece. Step 4, the digital trail. I filed a mail redirection with the post office, all correspondence rerouted to my new company address. I bought a new phone set to activate the moment I landed. My old number, his lifeline to me, would vanish. Those weeks felt surreal. During the day, I played the role of Richard's partner, nodding while he spoke about which French districts were up and coming or which rooftop bars would suit his brand. At night, I whispered to myself in the dark, "Hold on, Glenda. Just a few more weeks." The guilt gnawed at me sometimes. He wasn't violent, wasn't monstrous in the way people imagine toxic partners to be. He was charming to others, magnetic in crowds. He bought me flowers, left notes, kissed my forehead in public. But the private truth was sharper. He had eroded me, worn me down, until I believed I needed him. That was the violence. One evening, as I sat cross-legged on the floor of my workshop, carefully wrapping the model of the Sydney Opera House, Richard appeared at the door. He leaned against the framed glass of wine in hand, watching me. "Still playing with your little toys?" he asked. I glanced up, forcing a neutral smile. "Just making sure they're packed safely." He chuckled, shaking his head. "You're adorable, Glenda. Honestly, once we're in Europe, you won't have time for this. Too much to see, too many people to meet." I nodded. Let him think he was right. That was the trick now, let him underestimate me all the way to the end. As the calendar crept closer to August, my double life intensified. At work, I was designing schedules and reviewing blueprints for the European project. At home, I was slipping papers into files, marking boxes, discreetly memorizing the timeline, like it was one of my engineering projects. Richard's excitement grew in tandem. He talked about farewell parties, about who he'd invite to our going away dinner. I just smiled, knowing that while he rehearsed speeches about our next chapter, I was building the final blueprint that would remove him from my life. Sometimes late at night, I'd catch myself trembling, not from fear, but from anticipation. What I was doing was risky. If he caught on, there would be arguments, scenes, maybe even sabotage. But every time the doubt crept in, I remembered his smirk. Please, Glenda, you'd never survive without me. He was wrong. And in 60 days, he was going to find out just how wrong he had been. The weeks leading up to August passed in a blur of tension. By day, Richard's voice filled the apartment with talk of wine districts, couture showrooms, and rooftop soirees we would host in Paris. By night, I whispered my mantra to myself, hold steady, Glenda. The blueprint is set. Every step of my plan felt like tightening the final bolts on a bridge before the first car drives across. One wrong move, one overlooked detail, and the whole structure could collapse. The countdown began. On August 1st, the movers arrived. Richard was at a lunch meeting, the perfect cover. They swept through the apartment with industrial efficiency. I gave explicit instructions, boxes marked with blue tape, mine were to be shipped to Europe. Boxes marked with red, his went into storage. They packed his Italian suits, his collection of bespoke cufflinks, his curated conversation pieces from art fairs. Every object went into climate-controlled security under his name. I paid for the first 3 months in advance. No one could accuse me of cruelty. When Richard returned that evening, I told him the relocation team had done a preliminary run-through. He barely blinked, just asked if they'd remembered to take measurements for his wine rack. His arrogance again was my greatest ally. August 10th. I sat alone in my workshop, wrapping my most fragile model, a miniature of the Golden Gate Bridge. Each cable, each beam, had been my therapy during the darkest months with Richard. I ran my fingers over the delicate frame, whispering, "You'll cross the ocean with me." Richard appeared in the doorway holding 2 champagne flutes. To us, he grinned, handing me one. "Paris, here we come." I raised the glass lips, brushing the rim, but not drinking. My smile hid the truth he would never step foot in Paris with me. August 14th, the day of my flight. The apartment was eerily bare. Movers had cleared it, leaving only echoes. The walls that had once held Richard's curated art prints were empty, a blank slate. My belongings were already in transit across the Atlantic. His were safely tucked away in a suburban storage unit. That morning, Richard dressed sharply for what he called our farewell brunch. He kissed my cheek, promising to be back by 6 so we could leave for the airport together. As the door clicked shut, silence filled the space like oxygen. I walked through the apartment one last time, checking everything. Storage unit details confirmed. Lease termination confirmed. New tenant move-in date locked. My passport and flight ticket tucked neatly into my bag. At 4:00 p.m., I stood in the empty living room, staring at the space where our sofa used to be. I pulled out my phone and composed a single clinical message. "Richard, your belongings are safe at storage facility name. The key and access card are waiting under your name at the front office. Unit number attached. Paid for 3 months in advance. Take care." I attached a photo of the key and access card. Hit send. Then, without hesitation, I slid the phone into an electronics recycling bin downstairs, a clean severing of the digital tether. By the time Richard returned at 6:00, expecting to sweep me into an Uber bound for the airport, the apartment door would be opened by a stranger, the new tenant. I could almost see it unfold in my mind's eye. Richard's confusion, his indignation, his voice rising as he demanded to know why someone else was in his apartment. The slow, crushing realization as the truth settled in. But I wasn't there to see it. At 6:30, I was already boarding my flight. As the plane taxied down the runway, I pressed my forehead against the window. The city lights blurred into streaks. My chest ached, not from loss, but from release. I didn't feel rage. I didn't even feel triumph. Just a quiet, powerful calm. Like the deep hum of an engine lifting me into a future I had built with my own 2 hands. For the first time in years, I was free. The seatbelt light flickered off. The stewardess offered drinks. Around me, passengers settled into the rhythm of a long-haul flight. And me, I leaned back, closed my eyes, and whispered, "You said I couldn't survive without you, Richard. Watch me." The first morning in my new city, I woke up to silence. No Richard sighing about my lack of coordination. No calendar alerts for parties I didn't want to attend. Just the hum of traffic far below and the taste of strong European coffee. For the first time in years, my life belonged to me. But freedom, I soon realized, doesn't come without echoes. 48 hours after I sent that final text, my old email account, the one I had abandoned, erupted like a bomb site. Hundreds of messages stacked in chronological desperation. The first ones were blistering. From Richard. Where the hell are you? This isn't funny. What did you do with my things? Do you realize how insane this is? Then came the demands. Glenda, answer me. Now. You can't just disappear. We're a team. This is cruel, childish, beneath you. As the hours stretched, the tone shifted. Pleading replaced fury. Okay, look, we can fix this. I'll forgive you if you just come back. Don't throw away 5 years over some stunt. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My new phone, my new number were clean slates. I only checked the old account to understand the fallout. By day 3, Richard's allies entered the battlefield. Chloe. His ever-loyal friend sent me a wall of text. You're a monster. Do you know what you've done? Richard is destroyed. He hasn't eaten. He hasn't slept. He gave up everything for you, and you treat him like garbage. Her words slid off me like rain on glass. If Richard was destroyed, it was because his control had been ripped from him. Then his mother joined in her email, dripping with disappointment. This isn't the Glenda I knew. You were such a sweet girl. How could you abandon him like this? Relationships are about sacrifice. Don't you know how much you've hurt him? I stared at the screen, the irony almost suffocating me. Sacrifice I had sacrificed for 5 years, my wardrobe, my friends, my peace. Richard hadn't lost anything except access to me. But the most chilling strike came not by email, but through my workplace. 3 days after my arrival, my manager, Mr. Davies, summoned me. He looked unsettled. Glenda, he said carefully, we received a call from a woman claiming to be your fiancé's ex. She was hysterical, saying there was a medical emergency with your mother. She demanded to know your new location, flight details, contact numbers. My blood ran cold. My mother was fine. I had spoken to her that very morning. Her name I asked, though I already knew. Bianca, he said, checking his notes. She insisted it was life or death. Our staff fortunately followed protocol. They refused to release information and flagged it to me immediately. I thought you should know. Bianca, his ex, the woman who apparently still played a role in his arsenal of manipulation. Or perhaps it was Richard himself feeding her lies, using her as a weapon. I exhaled, forcing calm. Thank you for telling me, and thank you for protecting my privacy. I'll handle it. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at the city lights. It wasn't just anger I felt. It was fear. Fear of how far Richard was willing to go. He hadn't simply sent desperate emails. He had tried to manipulate my company, my livelihood, with a fabricated emergency. For years, I had told myself he was just controlling, just arrogant. But this was dangerous. The next call came 2 days later. My new work phone buzzed with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Glenda, a sharp voice snapped. I recognized it instantly. Chloe, you need to fix this. Now. Richard is on my couch, half alive because of what you did. He can't even access his clothes because you dumped them in some facility he can't get into. You're heartless. My hand tightened on the phone. I inhaled, steadying myself. Hello, Chloe, I said calmly. There's nothing to fix. Richard's life is his responsibility. His belongings are safe, stored under his name. He has the key and the address. Nothing is hidden. Don't play games, she shot back. He went there. They wouldn't let him in without ID. His name wasn't even on the list. You're a psycho. An honest oversight, I admitted coolly. I've already corrected it. He has full access now. Handled. Handled, she barked. You blow up his life and think an email fixes it. He gave up everything for you. I let silence stretch before asking softly, what exactly did he give up, Chloe? His job, his friends, his network? No. He still has all of that. What he lost was my apartment, my income, my compliance. She faltered. I pressed on. And while we're talking about lies, tell Richard his little stunt with my company was noted. Pretending there was a family emergency, that's documented now. If he tries again, it won't be me he answers to. It'll be corporate legal. The silence on the other end told me she hadn't known. This isn't over, Glenda, she whispered finally. For me it is, I replied. I'm building something new, something he can't touch. I hung up before she could answer. That night, for the first time since leaving, I allowed myself to cry. Not because I regretted leaving, but because I realized the war had shifted fronts. Richard wasn't just furious. He was wounded, And wounded men, especially ones who built their identity on control, were dangerous. As I wiped my tears, I whispered to myself, "Hold steady, Glenda. The bridge is only half built, but you're stronger than you think." The morning after my call with Chloe, I woke to find a new email waiting for me. Not from Richard this time, but from my company's legal department. The subject line was cold and sharp potential harassment report. Inside the email detailed that my employer had formally logged Richard's fraudulent phone call about my mother's medical crisis. They attached a record of the incident, noting that any further attempts by him or his associates to contact me through corporate channels would be escalated to legal action. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. Relief mixed with dread. On one hand, I wasn't alone. My company was protecting me. On the other hand, Richard's desperation had just crossed into dangerous territory. He had weaponized lies. If I didn't draw a line now, he'd keep pushing until something broke. That evening, my phone rang again. The same unfamiliar number. I knew before I picked up. Glenda Chloe's voice snapped. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Richard is—" I cut her off, my voice low but steady. "Chloe, listen carefully. There's nothing to fix. Richard is not my responsibility anymore. He was never my dependent. He was a guest in my home, which I no longer lease. His possessions are safe stored under his name. He has the key, the access card, and full authorization." "You can't be serious," she scoffed. "He can't even get to his favorite clothes because of you. You've ruined him." I inhaled slowly, letting the silence stretch before speaking. "Ruined him, Chloe. Do you know what ruined me? 5 years of being told I wasn't enough. That my clothes were wrong, my friends weren't good enough, my hobbies were childish. He didn't see me as a partner, he saw me as a project. And I let it happen. That ends now." She hissed into the line. "You're twisting everything. He loved you. He built a life with you." My lips curved into a bitter smile. "No, Chloe. He built a brand with me as his prop. When I succeeded, it was his stage. When I struggled, it was proof he needed to manage me. That isn't love. That's ownership." There was a pause, then her voice hardened. "You can't just disappear. People don't vanish from relationships like this. You owe him." That word "owe" snapped something inside me. I rose from my chair, pacing across the sleek floor of my apartment, every word landing like steel. I owed him nothing, Chloe. And if we're talking about manipulation, let's talk about his little stunt with my company, pretending my mother was dying. That's not love. That's deceit. It's harassment. And it's documented now. If he or you tries something like that again, corporate legal will get involved. Her sharp intake of breath told me she hadn't known. "Glenda, you don't understand," she stammered. "He's desperate. He needs you." "No," I said firmly. "He needs control." And when I took it back, he unraveled. That's not my burden anymore. The silence that followed was thick, heavy. Finally, Chloe's voice dropped to a low hiss. "This isn't over." For me, I said my tone final it is. And I hung up. My hands trembled as I set the phone down. But the tremor wasn't fear anymore, it was release. For the first time, I had faced Richard's enforcer head-on and refused to bow. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood by the window of my apartment watching the city pulse with life. Cars moved like arteries of light. People hurried down sidewalks. Voices echoed faintly through the glass. I was just one small figure among millions, but I was free. Yet freedom, I realized, was fragile. Richard wasn't done. Men like him never accepted defeat quietly. 3 weeks later, my prediction came true. A letter arrived at my company's legal office, forwarded to me with a note. "Please be aware of the following claim." The letter was from a law firm representing Mr. Richard Hayes. I skimmed the bold paragraphs, bile rising in my throat. He was demanding financial compensation for emotional distress, claiming I had abandoned him after he had made career sacrifices for me. He wanted palimony, despite us never being married. And the most absurd demand of all, half the value of my architectural models. He described them as jointly owned art assets of considerable monetary value. I laughed, the sound bitter hollow. The same models he mocked as dusty toys were suddenly priceless treasures he wanted to cash in on. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. But when I forwarded the letter to corporate legal, their response was swift, professional, devastating. "We've reviewed the claims their counsel wrote. They are baseless. We will draft a formal response." For the first time since I left, I allowed myself to exhale deeply. I wasn't fighting this battle alone anymore. Still, I couldn't shake the thought Richard had escalated. He wasn't just angry. He was attempting to destroy me legally, to punish me for daring to live without him. And yet somewhere beneath my fear, there was something else. Something colder, sharper. Resolve. If he wanted a war, I would fight it. Not with rage, not with games, with precision, with the same patience and foresight I used to build bridges. I whispered to myself as I closed the email. Hold steady, Glenda. He thinks you're fragile steel. But you are reinforced concrete. He will not break you. The envelope was thick, its weight alone daring me to crumble. When I slid it open, the contents spilled like venom. Richard had hired a lawyer. The letter accused me of wrongful abandonment, of inflicting severe emotional distress, of financial sabotage. He claimed he had sacrificed his career for me, that he had uprooted his entire life to follow my selfish ambitions. And then came the most laughable part: he demanded palimony, despite the fact we were never married, never shared a bank account, never held a joint lease. To Richard, entitlement didn't require legality, it only required audacity. But the crowning jewel of his fantasy was buried halfway down the page, a demand for half the value of my architectural models. He called them co-owned art pieces of significant financial worth. For years he had mocked them. Dusty toys, he'd say, rolling his eyes while I bent carefully over beams and glue. And now suddenly they were priceless treasures he wanted to strip from me. The hypocrisy was almost poetic. I sat at my desk letter, trembling in my hands, torn between fury and disbelief. Was this what he had reduced himself to? Turning my passion into a bargaining chip. My phone buzzed with an email notification. Corporate Legal had already received a copy. The subject line steadied me. We've got this. Their response came the next day, a masterpiece of calm obliteration. First, legal status. They stated clearly that Richard and I were never married, never registered partners, and had no shared assets. His claim of palimony was dismissed outright. Second, the apartment. They attached a copy of my lease agreement, solely in my name, along with the official 60-day termination notice. Legally, Richard had been nothing more than a long-term guest. He had no rights to the property. Third, possessions. They produced the signed contract from the storage facility, proof that I had carefully preserved his belongings paid in advance and ensured he could access them. Far from hiding his possessions, I had safeguarded them. Fourth, abandonment. They countered his narrative with hard evidence. My signed promotion acceptance dated weeks before my departure, along with travel documents and relocation contracts. My move was not an act of impulse, but a professional step long in motion. Finally, the counterclaim. The letter closed with precision. They documented his fraudulent call to my company, the harassment through proxies, the repeated attempts to invade my privacy. It warned that any further legal action from him would trigger a formal harassment complaint against him. It was surgical, elegant, brutal. When I read it, my hands stopped trembling. For the first time in months, I felt the kind of confidence I carried on construction sites, the assurance that comes when every beam, every calculation, every load test aligns perfectly. The structure holds. A week later, silence fell. Richard's lawyer sent a one-sentence email. Our client withdraws all claims. That was it. No apology, no concession. Just quiet retreat. But retreat had consequences. I heard about them weeks later through my sister Maya. Bianca told someone who told me, she said cautiously over the phone, Richard had to pay his lawyer out of pocket. Expensive, apparently. And after the 3 months you prepaid for storage ran out, he couldn't afford to keep his things there. He had to move them into his parents' garage. The image almost made me laugh. Richard, who had curated every corner of my apartment like a showroom, forced to stack his conversation pieces between lawn chairs and old Christmas decorations. And Chloe, I asked. Maya hesitated, then chuckled. Let's just say her couch wasn't a permanent solution. She kicked him out after a while. She got tired of being his unpaid therapist. I exhaled, leaning back in my chair. Richard, the man who once controlled every thread of my life, was unraveling in the suburbs. Stripped of his stage, his audience, his props. And me, I had survived. More than that, I had thrived. My new apartment felt like mine in ways my old one never had. My models, those so-called dusty toys, sat proudly on custom-built shelves, displayed like the art they were. My job consumed me in the best way, challenging projects, colleagues, who respected my voice, the exhilaration of building something that would last. Sometimes, though, I thought about Richard's words. You'd never survive without me. I realized then my revenge was never about punishing him. It wasn't even about proving him wrong. It was about proving something to myself. That I could build a life without his scaffolding. That I was not fragile steel, but reinforced concrete. And with each passing day as my new life took shape, I felt it more deeply. He hadn't just lost me. He had lost the illusion that I was ever his to begin with. 6 months. That's how long it had been since I boarded the plane, leaving Richard's curated world behind. If you had asked me then how I would feel now, I might have guessed relief. Maybe loneliness. Maybe guilt. But the truth is simpler, stronger. I feel whole. My apartment is no longer a sterile corporate unit. It's mine. Soft rugs underfoot. Books stacked high. Sunlight spilling across a wooden desk where my models stand in quiet triumph. The walls aren't curated for someone else's brand. They tell my story. The Pont de Normandie dominates the corner. Still unfinished, its sweeping arches stretching across a foam base. It's the most ambitious model I've ever attempted. Every evening I spend an hour threading cables, sanding edges, sketching adjustments. The work requires patience, precision, vision, all the things I nearly lost in the years Richard insisted I was incapable. At work, I'm thriving. The bridge project is grueling, exhilarating, the kind of once-in-a-lifetime challenge I used to dream about. My colleagues respect me, not because I fit an image, but because I deliver. I solve problems. I lead. And outside of work, I've found something unexpected: community. A local group of model builders welcomed me in. For the first time, I share my dusty toys with people who understand their worth. We trade techniques, admire each other's craftsmanship, laugh over glue mishaps. What Richard dismissed as childish, others recognize as art. I don't feel like I've started over. I feel like I've finally started. Richard, of course, didn't disappear. He lingers at the edges of my life like a cautionary tale. Maya keeps me updated, though she filters the details, knowing I don't need every scrap of his downfall. But the picture is clear enough. After losing his lawsuit, Richard had to pay his lawyer. His finances bled. Once the storage payments I covered ran out, he moved his curated belongings into his parents' garage, stacked between boxes of old tax records and plastic tubs of holiday decorations. His glamorous circle, Chloe included, faded. No one wants to house a man who can't stop complaining about how cruelly he was treated. Last I heard, he was juggling 2 jobs just to scrape by. He lives in a cramped apartment, no balcony, no space to host his glittering soirees. When people ask about me, he calls me heartless, manipulative, selfish. But never once, Maya said, has he taken responsibility for what happened. I thought I would feel satisfaction hearing it. Revenge. Triumph. But what I feel strangely is pity. Because Richard isn't fighting me anymore. He's fighting the mirror, and he's losing. He once told me I couldn't survive without him. But the truth is, he couldn't survive without me, without someone to manage to polish, to elevate him by proxy. He mistook control for love, manipulation for care. He built a life on image, not foundation. And when I walked away, the image collapsed. I don't hate him. Hatred would still tie me to him. What I feel is distance, like watching a storm recede on the horizon. It raged once it terrified me, but now it's only a memory of thunder. One evening, as I adjusted the tiny suspension cables on the Pont de Normandie model, I realized why this project mattered so much to me. Bridges are about connection. They span divides, defy gravity, stand firm against winds and waves. They are built to last, but only when their foundations are strong. Richard and I had no foundation, just a facade. That's why we crumbled. But me, I am building something different now. Every piece I place on that model is a reminder. Strength takes time, vision takes patience, and resilience is crafted, not given. When the final arch slots into place, when the last cable is tightened, I'll step back and see not just a bridge, but a testament. To survival, to self-reliance, to freedom. I'll see proof that the girl Richard dismissed as helpless built something stronger than his control could ever contain. Because the truth is simple, undeniable, unshakable. I didn't just survive without him. I flourished.